Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello, my guest is Dennis Stinson. He is Vice President of Sales for Fujitsu General America, and he has been in the HVAC industry for over 30 years. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you in your long-running show and talk about some great things that affect all of us global citizens. Thank you.
Well, we certainly need to continue to remind ourselves of what we can do to make our homes and buildings more energy efficient, particularly during this COVID era where we're stuck at home. What do you recommend is the number one priority to have our places, our houses, be most efficient in optimizing our energy use?
Wow, that's a big question. So you're exactly right that now with COVID, we are certainly more conscious of our home comfort. We're spending a lot more time there. Maybe some of our rooms are being repurposed. Maybe what was a bedroom we're now using as an office. Maybe we have kids home learning virtually from home. We have mom and dad or even grandparents working amongst the house when normally the house would be empty. So we're reusing our houses today in ways that maybe it wasn't designed to do. And we're also noticing whether we're comfortable doing that or not. We're also noticing whether we're efficient doing that. And then we're also noticing, too, whether we're that friendly to the environment while we're doing that as well. So the best way to start is always to bring in a professional. So bringing in a professional HVAC contractor and have them give a hard look at the system, whether our system would be worth upgrading to go to something more efficient, more comfortable, whether our current system needs to be maintained or repaired or replaced or serviced. The best place to start is always to call in a professional and have them look at the system and see if what we have is what we should have, is what we're using to the best of our ability, and is something we want to continue moving forward.
Even though your company makes high-efficient heat pumps for heating and air conditioning, do you ever recommend just having windows and opening the windows and forget the air conditioning?
Well, there's nothing like fresh air, right? So absolutely. There are times when home comfort is measured by the person on the inside, on whether you want some heating or some cooling or just fresh air coming in. Opening a window is a great way to exchange the air in your house to get yourself comfortable, to balance your relative humidity, to give you better indoor air quality in most instances. So opening the window is a great method of conditioning your home and providing home comfort. What we see a lot now in home conditioning systems, residential systems we'll spend most of our time talking about today, we're seeing requirements to bring in fresh air from the outside. So even a residential domestic HVAC system now through the ASHRAE standards can look at a level of fresh air coming in from the outside. So when we look at indoor air quality, those that work in the engineering community normally call it sterilization, filtration, and ventilation. Those of us that spend time out in the field call it trap, zap, and swap. But what we look to do is we look to sterilize the air. We look to have a good media filter to collect it. And then we also look at ventilation, which is air exchanges. So absolutely, opening the windows is a very good thing for home comfort.
You mentioned standards. There are so many different kinds of standards. We know that there are building standards, and there are standards in the U.S. that are different than those in Europe. Within an industry, there may be standard, and we know about Energy Star and how efficient appliances are. So as a consumer, which standard do we go by?
Well, there are a lot of them, and you're right. And I don't think standards are a bad thing. I really don't. So we look at larger standards when we look at global warming standards, and that's going to relate to the types of refrigerants that we're allowed to use and permitted to use, and that's CFCs and HCFCs, and we've got some new changes coming up in 2023 where we'll see another change, which is good. But then we also look at building standards. So when we look at manufacturing of houses, our houses are getting much, much tighter, and that's a good thing because they tend to be more energy efficient, which requires less energy to heat or cool them. But because they're tighter, now requires a greater ventilation requirement, which is some of those standards I alluded to earlier. earlier, now we're bringing fresh air in. I grew up in a house that was built in the 30s, and you didn't really have to open the window to get fresh air in the house because the house was so loose. But nowadays, houses are built so tight that you need to bring in fresh air from the outside. So we have international standards on refrigerants. We have national and regional standards for building codes. And as a consumer, we'll often look a lot towards efficiency standards. And in my business, the HVAC business, we measure that a couple of different ways. We measure heating performance in an HSPF, which is heating season performance factor. And as we relate to heat pumps, that tells us basically the efficiency of the heat pump. The higher the number, the better. When we take a look at air conditioning, we typically look at a SEER rating, which is a seasonal energy efficiency rating, and that tells us how many kilowatts in to how many BTUs out. So it's a factor based on air conditioning performance based on the energy put in. Again, the higher the number, the better. So when we take a look at operational efficiency of a piece of equipment, we look at HSPF for heat pump performance side, and we look at SEER for air conditioning performance side. Those are some of the things that as a consumer you would probably see predominantly in front of you.
You mentioned your 1930s home, and I compare my 1930 home with that of my family's home that I grew up in, built in 1950s. And there's quite a difference because I don't have to worry about air going in and out because there's a lot of leakage, and I have a gravity heater which doesn't use electricity. But yet the 1950s home doesn't have the circulation. It has to have more electricity used for the heater, for the air conditioning. There's quite a bit of difference, and it's hard to renovate them to all be efficient.
Absolutely. The home that I grew up in, that actually my mother still lives in, was built in the 30s, and loose is a good way to describe it, as you described your family home. Now that I've built homes, they tend to be a lot tighter, and the heating and air conditioning system requirements are a lot smaller than the house that I grew up in, but the size of the houses are inverted the other way. So again, the building codes are a good thing, and they certainly give us safety and standards, but they've also taken us down the energy efficiency side of it. And the less energy we use, the better we are.
Your company, Fujitsu, is international in over 35 countries. What is the difference in Europe or in the main country of Japan versus America? Are the same heat pumps, energy efficient heat pumps for the heating and air conditioning the same, or do you have to make them different for different places?
There's two questions to answer there that I'll answer for you. And one is obviously the electrical requirements in different countries, be it voltage or hertz, is different. So the equipment is slightly different in terms of its electrical input to be able to put it out. The equipment in and of itself is fundamentally similar in the fact that it's a heat pump and it's a high efficiency heat pump, and the styles are fundamentally the same. So the equipment, other than some modifications for electrical components, is fundamentally the same. The markets are entirely different though, and that's where it kind of gets interesting. In most markets other than the U.S., they do not use central systems, meaning that they tend to use the types of products that we manufacture, which are ductless heat pumps. And just to regress a little bit, in the United States, we tend to put a central system in the basement, in the attic, and then we run ductwork to each individual room. That's okay, but we tend to have some duct loss and some inefficiencies in the system to do that. And we're heating or air conditioning the entire house the same way. So we have one thermostat in the hallway that we condition the entire house based on whether that says we need it or not. So unused bedrooms, bathrooms, what have you, are all heated and cooled to the same temperature based on one thermostat in the hallway. In most other countries around the world, they use the mini split for the sake of argument. So they have a condensing unit outside. It's piped to a number of indoor units, and each indoor unit can have its own temperature. So if I like to sleep at 65 degrees, but my teenage daughter would like to be at 68 or 72, somebody doesn't have a window open or a blanket on, we just set our thermostats at different temperatures. As my kids grew up and move out and went off to school, I don't need to heat or air conditioning their bedroom to the same standard as the rest of the house. So it's very easy to take a step back and say, well, if my house has a 40,000 BTU load, but I'm only controlling 25% of that, then we can realize really quickly the type of energy savings that we see on that, plus the comfort side that you actually get the temperature that you want, not what the thermostat in the hallway says.
It seems as though America needs to adapt some of those changes. I know that because of that central system, I have to close some vents to try not to heat the unused rooms, but it's not as efficient as controlling it per room.
Exactly.
Your company is manufacturing products in many different countries. So are the standards different for your facilities, for your operations, for your manufacturing? Are you making sure that the factories are not creating excessive emissions, they're not polluting the waters, that the people are getting fair trade wages, that the transportation of the units is as efficient as possible?
Yes. Our company mission, our chairman, Mr. Saito, is very much cognizant of the fact that we are citizens of a much larger community. In fact, if you were to look at our international website, you would see that we live to the motto of living together for our future. And really what we talk about is through innovation and technology, we deliver a brighter future with the peace of mind to our customers and societies around the world. And to that point, we spend considerable amount of time and effort on measures against global warming. So when you look at our facilities, you will see the introduction of solar panels to reduce our electrical draw on that. You will see measurements against some of our factories in terms of scrubbing our chimneys so that we're not putting toxins out in the environment. When you take a look at just smart distribution, you'll see where we have shortened our trade routes so that we're not relying on long truck rides or long ship rides to do that. So we've added a lot of logic to the system to where we're reducing not only our manufacturing resources to be able to do that, but then also our transportation. And then we continue to have efforts along the line here in the U.S. and internationally on a much greater use of technology to conduct our meetings with. So that sounds kind of simple, but when we have a meeting, instead of flying people into another town, obviously now with today's technology, it's much easier and more convenient for us to do it via video conference, much easier and much friendlier, not logging all those miles to do that. And we were doing that prior to COVID, so unfortunately when the pandemic hit, this is resources that we knew how to do.
That's great that you were doing it before it was required to do it. You have been an HVAC industry veteran for over 30 years. You've worked with other companies. Is your company a leader, or are all the companies in this heating and air conditioning industry adopting the energy efficient technologies, or are they still lagging behind?
I would tell you that the HVAC industry is certainly on the forefront of evolving technology in terms of efficiency. When we take a step back and look at the energy usage in the United States, we tend to see in a couple of places, we tend to see that in transportation, and then we also tend to see that in HVAC, making up a large percentage of it.
You mentioned earlier that one of the areas that a person can be engaged in to have more efficient, sustainable homes is to look at the technology that is used and be sure that it is efficient and possibly upgrade. If there's not the necessity to change the technology, aren't there other ways to be efficient just by turning down the thermostat or turning up the thermostat?
Oh, absolutely. We're referencing having a professional look at it. So the contractor may come in and tell you that your piece of equipment is efficient. Today, for air conditioning, it's 13 SEER in the north and it's 14 SEER in the south. And so assuming that we meet those standards, contractor may come in and say it's in good shape, but he or she may recommend at that point is that it be serviced so that we keep it clean, we keep the dust and dirt and debris off of our coils so that we can exchange our heating and air conditioning efficiently. Not cleaning your piece of home comfort system is the same as just throwing a blanket over it. So cleaning will allow it to transfer energy better. Making sure we're keeping up on those filters. Lots of times we don't change those filters as robustly as we should be or as frequently as we should be. So we should think that at the beginning of every month we go down to our basement or out to our garage or wherever our piece of equipment is and change that filter. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and I would almost guarantee that by changing the filter, what you would save in energy to replace the filter would be recouped on a monthly basis. The other side of it is that we can get into the technology now of setback thermostats. When we go away to work or we leave the house for a period of time, we can set the thermostat back or we can set it back at night so that we're adjusting the temperature, not keeping it a constant temperature 24/7, 7 days a week. The interesting thing now is with the advent of Wi-Fi is we can do so many things with it. So for instance, our system, we have the capability of using a wall thermostat with it, but you can also tie it into your Alexa or your Google Chrome so that you can holler out at it, change the temperature up or down or set it back. We recently got tied in with the If app, which is the If This Then That app, and that allows you to cross a lot of your applications.
We've been talking primarily about how to make our homes more efficient. I assume that all of these ideas are equally applicable to our offices or our schools or other facilities that we utilize.
Yeah, we make both residential and commercial equipment, and a good percentage of our business is in the commercial environment. So what we're talking about in terms of high-efficiency heat pumps, everything we make is a heat pump, and zoning and inverter, meaning it ramps up and down, is scalable from residential to commercial. So the technology we're talking about here is applicable to everything from a modest home to the biggest of office buildings, yes.
Where do you source the raw materials for the equipment, and are you sure that that exploitation of the environment to extract those materials is not destroying wild areas or ecosystems and wildlife habitat?
Yes, I'm comfortable that through the designation of our company as being responsible citizens, that part of our sourcing of material includes the researching and the tracking of the raw materials from point of origin all the way through manufacturing. As a global company, we have that responsibility not only to our trade partners, but also to our consumers at the end.
The buildings that we use for work, education, living, homes, it's so important that they be efficient. We want heating, we want cooling, we want to live with technologies that aren't polluting our environment. I want to thank you so very much for being a leader in this area, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for asking us. The pleasure is all ours, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Dennis Stinson, who is Vice President of Sales for Fujitsu General America. I'm Nancy Perlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.